Hello and welcome to my watch list for the second part of the FPL season. Today I'm going to be reviewing some of the options. If you're having any second thoughts or any doubts about your players, I'll do my best to try and clear them up. So let's get started. Number one on the list is Kieran Trippier in this premium defender bracket. He's an excellent option. He has the goal threat, he has the assist potential, he plays in a great defense. He's nailed on starter, so yeah, absolutely amazing option. The fixtures aren't the best. You can risk going without him, but I presume many of us have value tied up in him, so he's just an easy keep. Next up is Joao Cancelo. So the most nailed Manchester City defender, the goal threat and the assist potential isn't quite there this season, but I hope it improves in the second part of the season. But as I said, the most nailed City defender. That's basically the reason he is number 2 on this list. You can go without him due to his high price if you spend the money wisely on other areas of your team. But seeing as he has Everton at home, Wolves at home, a double game week in the next 5, so the fixtures are good. He might even get another double game week in the near future, and he's just a superior option to the likes of Laporte, Stones, Akanji, Walker, simply because he's guaranteed minutes. Next up is Reece James. The Chelsea defender hasn't quite hit the heights of previous seasons, but with Bournemouth, Nottingham Forest, and the double game week in the next 3, he's a lock in my team, I think. Yeah, we all know about Reece James. His assist potential and his attacking returns have been amazing the previous few seasons. He's just a great player. I love watching him, and I think I will own him by the time the game starts. Next up, we have the Liverpool defenders. So Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold. I've put Robertson slightly higher than Trent simply because there's some issues with Trent's fitness and he might miss that Aston Villa game. If you're planning on bringing Trent in, just make sure to wait until the deadline, see if any news pops up tomorrow. Yeah, Liverpool haven't been great defensively. I mean, that's an understatement. They have been absolutely shocking in the first part of the season. Robertson does have a few assists. Trent, even though the underlying stats have been decent, hasn't really lived up to the potential we saw in the previous few seasons. So it's a risk, it's a punt, but it might well pay off simply because we know how good Liverpool is, and if Klopp manages to revitalize this side, Robertson and Trent are surely to be amongst the points. Next up is Perisic, the World Cup hero. Might miss the first few games. As I said about Trent, maybe wait until the deadline to decide. But Spurs haven't really been impressive in the first part of the season. They concede the odd goal. They don't score a lot except for Harry Kane. Perisic has a couple of assists, but for 5.5 million it just hasn't been good enough. He has a double game week in 20, but it's Arsenal and Man City. I expect rotation in this busy Christmas period for almost every team, and especially for the Spurs wingbacks. Next up we have Laporte and Stones. Awful options. Honestly, just avoid them. They are too expensive. I would rather just go for the likes of Akanji and Walker, because Akanji has seemingly cemented his place in this Manchester City team. Now, of course, that was due to Walker being out for large parts of the season, and Akanji had to fill in. But now Ruben Dias is out for up to a month, as far as I have read. So Akanji might well be the best option out of these. Yeah, I know Walker is the first choice right back, the only right back they have. But Pep has played Stones, Pep has played Akanji, Pep has played Cancelo there. So I'm just not convinced about Walker. I would prefer Akanji, but honestly, just avoid Laporte and Stones. I can live with Akanji and Walker. Next up is the 4.5 to 5.5 million bracket. So number one on the list is Ben White. Why? Because he's the cheapest Arsenal defender and he has the benefit of being hooked early, oftentimes in games. So, for example, if Arsenal concede in the 80th minute, but Ben White was hooked off at 75 minutes, you get to keep your clean sheet and gain rank on all the players who have Gabriel and, for example, Saliba, who is also highly owned. The reason Saliba is not even on this list because he's on 4 yellow cards, if I'm not mistaken, and because he's the most expensive Arsenal defender currently. And Gabriel statistically has higher goal threat. Ben White has the benefit of being hooked off before the 90th minute. So yeah, in my opinion, don't go for Saliba. I know Saliba is probably their best defender, but in FPL you only get points for goals, clean sheets, and assists. So him being good doesn't really factor into our decision making. Next up is Luke Shaw. So the Manchester United defender had a decent World Cup. Never seems to translate his international form into club form. But I mean, look at those fixtures. Next three: Nottingham Forest, Wolves, and Bournemouth. You're simply playing the fixtures here. That's why he's a good option. Forest at home. I mean, even though United are missing some players, for example, I think Varane is not yet back. He has the extended rest period because he played in the World Cup final. Maguire has an illness, I believe. He's doubtful. He's doubtful for the next game week, and Dallo is injured. So their defense is on its knees, to be honest. But these teams have just been so poor. And if you're not going to target Nottingham Forest, Wolves, and Bournemouth, then which teams are you going to target, really? Next up, Akanji and Walker. I already talked about them a bit, but yeah, just to reiterate, Akanji, I prefer him over Walker. Walker is a bit cheaper. If you think Walker is going to start the majority of games, go for Walker, but I would prefer Akanji with Ruben Dias being out. Cucurella, 5.1 million is a 0.7 million difference between him and Reece James. Is it worth it? Worth it? I don't think so. I think you go for Reece James, or you just go for Kepa, for example. Cucurella is pretty nailed now that Chilwell is out. He can play the left wing back, he can slot into left center back, but I would still prefer Reece James just for the extra attacking threat and bonus points. And this is the bracket of Castagne, Doherty, Emerson, Dunk, Dyer, and Tilo Kehrer. They all have their positives. For example, Castagne has been absolutely revitalized since we all swore off never to play Ward again, and Leicester suddenly just kept pumping out the clean sheets. So yeah, he's the Leicester defender with the most attacking potential, decent options, but 4.7, he's the same price as Ben White, so that's why he's the orange category. All these players, they have some upsides. For example, Doherty has scored 3 goals in the last 2 friendlies that Spurs have played, but again, rotation risk with Emerson. Castagne, fixtures not great from a defensive point of view, and he's not that cheap either. Dunk, Brighton might have a double game week in the near future. It's yet to be confirmed, but as I said, 4.7. Just get Ben White. Just get Luke Shaw. The thing with prices this season in FPL, which I don't really like, is that there's no incentive for going for these players from lower, let's say, or mid-table teams. For why would you go for Kehrer? I mean, I know West Ham are decent defensively. The fixtures are decent after Arsenal, but at 4.5 there are just better options. Next up is the 3.9 to 4.4 million bracket. First is Sven Botman at 4.4 million, excellent value. If Trippier didn't exist, we would all have Botman in our team. Now, of course, the problem is that Trippier does exist, and would I go for the double up? Maybe, definitely maybe. 4.4, it's hard to say no to that price. If you have some cash lying around and you don't want to go for these other options like Bueno, Patterson, Emerson, Nico Williams, Botman is an excellent option. Bueno has been playing a lot lately. At 3.9 million, I mean, you're getting a defender, even if he is a Wolves defender, for 3.9 million, you can't ask much more than for him to be starting. And he's a fullback, so you can always get lucky and get a random assist or goal even when they do concede. Same thing goes for Patterson. Everton, not a great team, but 4 million, can't go wrong with that. Even if they, for example, drop out of the first 11, if Johnny benches Bueno or Ait Nouri, which I doubt, benches Bueno, he's still just 3.9 million and you won't be in a rush to get rid of him. Patterson, the same thing. If, for example, Seamus Coleman, gets back to his old form somehow, 4 million on your bench, it's not a disaster. Great options, in my opinion, both of them. Next up, we have Perrault. Has some attacking potential. The new manager, I believe, for Southampton is going to try and shut up shop, try to make them more defensively solid. The fixtures are there, but he's a Southampton defender. And as I mentioned before, the incentive just isn't there. The price isn't there. There's too small a difference between assets like Perrault and assets like Ben White. So not really a consideration in my opinion. Estupinian, he's an attacking fullback. He's a good player in my opinion, but he sometimes gets hooked early, and not like Ben White early, not the 60th, 70th, 80th minute. He gets hooked off at halftime, for example. And that's something you definitely don't want. At 4.5 million, Dunk is just 0.2 million cheaper. If you're banking on Brighton having those double game weeks and you believe in Brighton's defense for some reason, yeah, go for Dunk rather than Estupinian. Next up, we have the West Ham pair of Emerson and Soufal. I prefer Emerson, definitely, because he can play on the left, and Cresswell is reportedly out. Soufal is fighting with Ben Johnson for that right back place and with Thilo Kehrer, but with the injuries they have in the middle, Thilo Kehrer will definitely play center back. So I would go for Emerson. 0.1 million cheaper, and in my opinion, a more nailed-on starter for the foreseeable future. After Arsenal, they have good games. You can definitely go for Emerson if you don't like Bueno or Patterson as your enablers. And we have Nico Williams at 4 million. He just plays in a worse team, in my opinion, or rather in a worse defense. So Bueno and Patterson are playing in teams that are just better defensively than Nico Williams. The fixtures also, I mean, when you're looking at these enablers, you don't really have to look at the fixtures because you're keeping them for a longer time. So the fixtures in the next 5, for example, don't really matter. But I would prefer Bueno and Patterson over Nico Williams. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the defender watch list. I'll be uploading the midfielder watch list and the forward watch list. So yeah, stay tuned guys and good luck.